Hello everybody, welcome to our manufacturing webinar, and we're just going to wait for a few more people to join and then we will get started. Okay, there's a few more coming into the webinar now. I'll just give it 10 more seconds. Okay, so hello and welcome to Marsh Commercial's webinar, Overcoming Supply Chain Challenges in Manufacturing. My name is Melanie Miller and I'm a development leader at Marsh Commercial, where I specialise in the manufacturing industry. We have a team of specialists within this sector where we pool our experiences and knowledge together in order to help our clients to mitigate risks where possible and making them aware of any emerging risks and issues that they may face. Now, if during today's webinar anyone does have any questions, we hope you do, for our panellists, then please send them to us via the Q&A section, which is just at the bottom of the screen, and we will answer as many as we can at the very end of the session. And for any questions that we don't have the time to answer, we will send this around as a summary to all attendees. So we have an agenda on the screen for you. We've got a great morning in store. We're going to be starting with Martin Pritchard, Kevin Garcher and Maria Granger from Filtermist. Filtermist manufacture a range of compact, quiet and efficient oil mist filters. They're based in Shropshire. They have 9 offices in 4 countries, and we'll be doing a Q&A with the panel and looking at how the recent events of Brexit and COVID have affected the different areas of their business in relation to their supply chain. And then on from there, we'll move on to Chrisnnigan at Fortec. Fortec are one of the UK's leading palletised freight distribution networks. They're a subsidiary of PAL X Group, so they form part of the largest overall collection of transport companies in the country. So Chris will give us some valuable insights into how the haulage industry are facing the recent challenges also of Brexit and COVID head on. As soon as we've finished with Chrisnnigan at Fortec, it'll be our very own James Krask at Marsh. James is our Consulting Director and Resilience Advisory Lead, quite a short title there. And he'll be speaking about the risk management advice for managing the supply chains. And finally, myself and my colleague, John McCardle at Marsh Commercial, we will speak about some true life client stories with you and discuss what the solutions and advice would be to help manage any issues that they faced. So without further ado, I would like to welcome Martin, Kevin and Maria from Filtermist to find out what their supply chain issues is that they've encountered. But firstly, Martin, Kevin, Maria, could you just all please introduce yourselves and explain what your role is in the company?
Yes, certainly. I'll kick off. My name is Martin Pritchard. I'm Group Supply Chain Manager for Filtermist. We have a global supply chain covering a wide variety of materials, different types of materials, and I look after that for the UK entity.
Great, thank you. Maria?
Hi, good morning, everybody. My name is Maria Granger. I'm the International Export Sales Manager for Filtermist. As Martin just said, we have a wealth of distributors and customers that we export out to worldwide, and I look after the team there and all of our distributors.
Thanks, Maria. And Kevin?
Hi, morning all. So I work in finance as a financial controller. So I take care of pretty much anything finance related.
Okay, lovely, thank you. So Maria, let's start with yourself. Can I ask you, what issues would you say that both Brexit and the pandemic has created within your specific area of the business?
Right, okay, well, as we just mentioned, we've already distributed worldwide. So from a business point of view and business setup, we were already in place in terms of having systems set up so that we can distribute worldwide. So we did think that it would be quite easy when Brexit occurred. How wrong were we? The main issues that we came across were that our customers over in the EU didn't have the correct setup, so that they needed URI numbers, that they needed a deferment account set up so that duties and taxes could be paid immediately, so that there was no backlog at customs. And that they also needed a customs broker in order to clear their goods at customs. So the challenges that we've faced really is the length of time. Before, when we used to be shipping to France, Spain, Italy, it was just like sending it up the road to Manchester, but now it's taking a lot longer. We've also noticed that the customs agencies that are set up, because they're having to log everything onto the customs mainframe, which they wouldn't have to do before, is taking an exceedingly longer amount of time. But we're getting there very slowly. It is improving. So January, February, March was very, very slow. Countries and customs are getting used to what's required and what's needed. So the process, I can say, is getting a little bit easier. In terms of COVID, we have, again, things have slowed down considerably because of country lockdown. I think Martin will touch on supply chain, getting goods in, that kind of thing has been a bit more tricky. Countries are opening up again, so that is good news, and we're seeing a positive sales increase. In fact, the last 2 months has been a really good increase for us. So yes, both challenges, both together, have really pushed us to the limits, but we're getting there, which is the great thing, really.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you. Thanks, Maria. So if we go to you, Cavan, what are the day-to-day issues that you've come across on the finance side? Have you had any knock-on effects on the business with Brexit, or has this caused any delays?
Yeah, so I mean, one of the impacts that we've seen is the delay in EU customer receipts. So there's now further requirements on the customer side to input a lot more details on that they're privy to, or that they even know that they should be doing. So in a lot of circumstances, we're going back and forth with these EU customers because they don't know that the receipts are just not being received here in the UK. So it's had quite a knock-on effect. And I think the other issue is probably around the import and the duty and the import VAT. There is so much more required. There's more forms, there's more certificates, there's more reconciliations that we have to do. And without tick boxing all of them, and without balancing everything, we're unable to claim this import VAT. So essentially, we're paying for all this VAT, and it's just becoming so much more difficult to get it reclaimed. There's such a delay in trying to reclaim all this import VAT. So I'd probably say those two are the biggest impacts we've seen here in finance.
Right, okay, yeah. Thank you for that, Cavan. Okay, Martin, so if we talk about Brexit to start off with, how did you prepare for Brexit?
We had quite an easy process. We'd obviously consulted a lot of the government websites, and we felt that all we needed to do was engage with clearing agents. And we took the decision that we would engage with our supply chain of shippers and import agents, and by giving them a letter of authority to clear our goods, we found that everything was relatively smooth, provided we did that preparation. We had a few teething issues in Q1, but I think everyone was learning, and even the shipping people were saying they didn't realise it was going to be this complicated. But for us, I have to say, on the import on the Brexit side, it's gone well so far.
Brilliant. Okay. And would you say there's anything that you maybe have learned, or anything that you do differently next time? Yeah,
the big one for me was country of origin for materials and supply declarations. This was something that we'd overlooked, to be honest with you, and we had to catch that back up. That really has manifested itself in the fact that we are our customers, especially our export customers, require this detail, and we didn't have that in place as quickly as we should have.
Yeah. Okay. So in terms of the last 12 months or so, when it comes to COVID, have you had any difficulties with regard to the supply chains that way?
Yeah, this is more of being of an issue for us. We've had some real difficulties. We've all seen the announcements from the likes of Jaguar Land Rover, where they have stopped production, closed down plants due to material shortages. We've seen the demand for electric cars, and Elon Musk building electric cars. And I think now he's building in China. We've seen a massive demand for those materials, which has put pressure on the supply chain, together with the release of this pent-up demand, which we're all experiencing. I'm not sure we understand why. We see China manufacturing back on track, but Europe still has reduced capacity, and this has resulted in extended lead times and a greater demand. And China, frankly, has taken a lot of the available supply, and we're trying to fight for that supply.
So, what does this mean for you as a company?
It's basic economics, I'm afraid. It's scarce resources competing in supply and demand. We're all trying to get these supplies that are ramping up, but Europe, as I said, not yet full production. Where we get massive demand, we get material shortages, we get extended lead times, and ultimately that reduces in higher prices. We've seen prices for copper, for electric motors that we just mentioned, and steel over the last 12 months has doubled. And frankly, those that will pay will get the supply. There is no shortcut to this. I think, though, when manufacturing in Europe is back up to capacity, we should see suppliers coming through much quicker. The estimates were, depending on COVID, how that goes throughout Europe, probably the end of Q3, and I think then we will see some reduced lead times and some lower prices. And I think there is a potential for some really low prices, because my view is that when we see these shortages and extended lead times, companies tend to overstock to cover the lead times and to cover the potential shortages. Of course, when supplies come through, they'll want to release that stock. They want to get paid for it because it's expensive, because they've had to pay a lot of money for it. And I'm hoping at that time that we will start to see not a glut of material, but sufficient material that we can see some normality on prices. That's my hope. That's my hope, anyway.
So how are you overcoming that now in the present?
We've been around the mill. We've looked at alternative specifications for more readily available materials. We've looked at alternative suppliers, and ultimately we've had to look at air freight and expediting deliveries. But have we found, as we found, everybody's looking at alternative materials. So we still have that supply chain issue. Everybody's looking at alternative suppliers. And if we don't have a relationship with those suppliers already, they're looking after their existing customer base. And so we're not really having much success there. We've not, at this point, had too many air freights, although in fact we have one this weekend. And again, air freights and shipping containers, again, are at the moment in short supply. I think what the learning is, or the reality is, by working with the existing supplier base, that really is delivering the best results. And we found that to be the best option.
Brilliant. Okay. Well, thank you, Kevin, Martin, and Maria, for sharing your experiences with us. That's really, really interesting for everyone to hear, actually. So we're going to hear from a slightly different perspective now, because we're going to go to Chrisnnigan at Fortec, so we can understand the supply chain issues that Chris has encountered from the distribution side. So Chris, can you just start by introducing yourself and explain what you do, Chris?
Yeah, good morning, everybody. My name's Chrisnnigan, as Melanie's rightly pointed out, so that's a good start. My job is I'm the operations director for Fortec, and in recent months and years, that's been involved in wearing many different hats on a daily basis. So that's no different to many other logistics businesses in the UK. We've seen some challenging times, which I'll take you through now.
Brilliant. Thank you, Chris.
No problem. Okay, first slide, please. So this first slide really highlights a report that was undertaken by PwC, and it reflects what I call the day-to-day challenges of the logistics business. And these are really sort of medium to long-term agenda items. So we're definitely seeing that individual customers and industrial customers now expect to get shipments faster, more flexibly, and with more transparency at a lower price. And as a result, it's no surprise that across the industry, both the operating models and profitability are under strain. I think that's well known, and people on this webinar today will be interacting with logistics businesses and will understand that. And it's clear that the pace of transformation for large manufacturing and retail customers will I think PwC pointed out as May, but we think it will be even faster than for private end user customers. So that's really the day-to-day job, and that's the lifeblood of what we do. But if I skip onto the next slide, please. This slide highlights really all of the key touch points in the sort of 12 to 15 month COVID pandemic. And all of those there, I mean, I appreciate there's a lot of detail on there, but that's just to highlight that all of those milestone dates within the pandemic crisis, that involved us having to review our businesses, our models, the welfare of our people. So that was on top of what was effectively the logistics day-to-day job. So that took some working through. I'll come on to the next slide, please. So what we saw really with COVID as it started to bite and the lockdown started to begin, we saw that from a people perspective, remote working for colleagues who were site-based, that was challenging and unusual for the logistics business. Absence management and resource cover was challenging. The health and safety and new ways of working, that was constantly evolving, and obviously people are at the forefront of what we do. So therefore we had to continually address and review. And the welfare of critical workers, that was challenging. We have a historic shipping model that very quickly transformed from small pallet shipments to large pallet shipments as we were sort of tasked by our customers and the government, for that matter, to supply the likes of the Nightingale hospitals and those sorts of things. So if we come back to what the facilities were in terms of our own operating facilities, the investments we had to put in place rapidly for welfare of employees, etc., was hugely expensive. The challenge was actually getting hold of the product we needed to protect our employees. And one of the key examples I always give is right at the start of the crisis, I ended up paying nearly £10,000 for a pallet of hand sanitizer. So there was that initial panic, and we had to react very quickly. And when we did, and as things started to stabilize and we adapted to a new way of working, the things we wanted to invest in had lengthy lead times. So we were constantly reviewing as well as undertaking the day job. In terms of the IT element of reacting to COVID, we saw huge cost and expenditure in updated hardware to allow people to work from home, remote system training, that was challenging. The investment in new meeting platforms and new hardware to facilitate everybody working off site, that was extremely challenging. But one of the key things that we found struggling, and this is reported across the logistics sector, is evidencing final mile activity for our customers. So the provision of PODs and people refusing to sign for things, and then contact rules. So there was a number of things that we saw as a challenge, but I'm pleased to say we addressed them, and we addressed them quickly. And then if I touch on the legislation around COVID, the challenges we saw were complex and rapid change to laws and guidance, repeated area-specific controls, which meant we were constantly evolving the supply chain optimization, rerouting areas, resourcing areas where things became challenging. The testing and tracing mandates, that was hugely complex within what we were trying to do. And at times, we certainly found that UK government guidance and practice was ambiguous at best. And so most of the logistics sector took a view around doing the right thing as they believed it to be. So I'll move on to the next slide, please. And then slap bang in the middle of the worst pandemic people have ever known, Brexit landed. And really there, as Martin said earlier, we worked through a number of scenarios and have done for a considerable period of time, which I'll highlight shortly. But these were things that we all saw as evolving steps. And the fear is that certainly for our fear was that how would we best engage the SME sector in terms of adapting to the new legislation? But that was not to say that the large multinationals and blue chips weren't exposed to some challenges, because we certainly saw that too. But the SME sector was hugely challenging in terms of dissemination of information and legislation. Could I have the next slide, please? So just to highlight what we certainly undertook, and this is replicated across the logistics sector, in 2020, in Q2, we built the new IT systems to facilitate all the things that we suspected were coming. And in Q2, we contract signed with brokers, etc. We created the IT links with our customs brokers and HMRC. In Q3, the operating terms were agreed with EU partners and contracts were confirmed. And we presented our operating plans to customers, etc. in Q3 as well. And in Q4, we undertook the final testing and training and retrained everybody. And as I'm sure you all appreciate, the costs and in both physical expenditure and manpower were significant, and tying into long-term contracts, because that's what the market demanded, has also not been cheap. So technology costs, we did a lot in-house, but that still involves manpower. So we were exposed to some sizable costs there. If I could just have the next slide, please. So just to highlight in terms of the people, training was extensive and ongoing, and it was recruiting really experienced staff, because the wage pressures on sourcing experienced customs staff were significant, and recruiting driver workforces has been challenging. So if we look at the facilities side, the cost to revise all of our site flows and the cost to increase our storage capabilities and hugely inflated purchasing costs are well known in the industry, as well as lengthy lead times for equipment, etc., the things we want to purchase. The Brexit IT element, integrating our systems into brokers and into HMRC was challenging, but achieved. Complex software builds and testing costs, that all the logistics sector was exposed to that. And if we look at the legislation side, we absolutely have the view that there was a clear evidence of lack of customer preparedness for the process, lack of customer awareness, definitely, and I repeat the fact that I said earlier, definitely more so in the SME sector. There was a general apathy to guidance, and I think people hoped that it would be relatively straightforward, and it wasn't. And we still form the opinion that the guidance from UK government is still a bit vague and a little bit lacking. And to drill into the detail, the export and import sector is littered with acronym and abbreviation, and it puts people off. And it's a knowledge-based thing that's slowly coming to the fore. Could I have the next slide, please? So in terms of what we did in 2020, which I've highlighted in terms of the planning, everything was as it should be, and we went live on the 1st of January with much enthusiasm and confidence. And it quickly and very quickly, we spotted a sizable challenge. So within week one, the admin functions, they grew exponentially. It was significant, and we were struggling to engage both with HMRC, which was virtually impossible, and give meaningful feedback to our customers. It was evident in week one that HMRC border force were not prepared for what was coming. It had been clear that a sizable workforce had been recruited and the experience clearly wasn't there. Week two, we saw increasing delays and dramatically increasing delays. And what we saw with that was all of our equipment was outside of its standard rota. The trailers were stuck in ports. They were quarantined by customs. They were waiting to go onto boats. So it resulted in us having to find effectively double the equipment just to cover things that we had no control on moving. We saw huge storage challenges in week three that meant that the stuff that we couldn't clear and ship was just sitting, waiting, pending departures. And in week three, we saw the competitors and even the large European integrators start to suspend their services. And it was absolutely evident to us in week four that the sector wasn't working for us, and primarily it wasn't working into the Republic of Ireland. And at that point in time, we took a decision to cease that operation. And the reason we did that, and I'll highlight that in the next slide, please, is it was absolutely apparent, despite a year of intensive planning, sizable cost, training, all these things that we hoped would ensure that the flows that the customers wanted, it was evident that we had to reinvent that. So in week five, everything changed and the day job got pushed to the back burner while we redesigned all the system flows to get particularly the Republic of Ireland going again and mainland EU. So we had to redesign all of the schedules. We redesigned all of our service offerings, and by that we changed Incoterms, we limited the Incoterms that were available to our customers. We had an extensive rebuild of the system, created new links into HMRC. We then had to retrain all of the staff and the customers on the new means, the new Incoterms, the new trade barriers. And we managed on week 9, I think it was, to restart a supply chain in a very basic form, but it was one that worked and managed to get critical volume through the borders. If I could just have the next slide, please. So aside from the pandemic and certainly the challenges around Brexit, the sector in terms of the logistics sector faces some critical challenges. And really what we're looking at now, and these are really coming to the fore, is in terms of people. Logistics UK is reporting a shortage of circa 80,000 drivers. The revision in the IR35 rules have removed thousands of drivers from the agency market, and there is without doubt a general labour shortage as a result of post-Brexit. Equipment purchasing, at the moment we're seeing a minimum of 6 months lead times to purchase new vehicles. I've just tried to order some and I'm looking at delivery dates now of February and March next year. In terms of going to the market for short-term equipment hire, the costs are significant if you can find anything. In terms of changing the compliance of the fleets, in terms of all the new criteria, in particular delivering into London, the new standards around direct vision, the clocks, the fours, all the new emission zone planning means we are having to invest in equipment, but we're doing so when we can actually get hold of it. With respect to legislation within the sector, HGV test availability in 2020 and early 2021 was non-existent. We were unable to train drivers. The costs are circa 5k minimum now for training a HGV driver, and the fleet insurance premiums for newly qualified drivers are significant. And just to give you a broad overview, we often find now that if we recruit new drivers and we invest in their training, we're having to send experienced drivers with them for upwards of 18 months as a requirement of the insurance. So the costs continue to increase. And with regard to our customers, we see a just-in-time solution at any cost is the customer requirement. The consignee demand and expectation is significant. Deliveries in and out of the RDC sector up and down the country is getting more and more expensive. Queues are increasing all the time. The technology impact is become the new USP rather than price, so we constantly invest in technology. And all of these things in terms of people, equipment, legislation can have an impact on the relationship with the customer unless you invest the time in ensuring that you fix those things. And then just for my final slide, please. So logistics is being redesigned, but that redesign will have many partners. And to just force the point home, people is a #1 challenge, and we're working with government now on how we can bring apprenticeships of different value to the sector. What can we do in terms of legislation and training? Investment. It's all investment. Innovation is absolutely critical. As I've said, we are trying to work with the government to ensure that the logistics sector has the resource within the parameters of the legislation and we're able to offer good service. And it's clear that we have to have some conversations with our customer base around revenue. And that, I hope, gives you a bit of an insight into the logistics sector in the last 15 months. Thank you.
Many thanks for that, Chris. That was a really interesting presentation. It's interesting because Brexit has caused so many issues, and then the pandemic comes along. So a lot of issues for everybody to sort out and find solutions for. So thank you for that, Chris.
No problem.
Okay, we now have an interactive poll, which I'll pass over to John McArdle to present. Thank you, John.
Thank you, Mal. Hopefully everybody can see the poll on screen. A few simple ideas here around your supply chain. So, what do you take in part? We'd love to see as many of you join in as possible. What do you feel are your top 3 biggest threats to your supply chain? There's a number of elements here at play: disruption at your suppliers, late payments, weather-related incidents, cyber disruption. It's an ever-increasing area of risk, political risk, or maybe it's something different. So the poll's going to go live. Please get involved and share your thoughts. It's great to see so many of you getting involved, and some interesting ideas coming from the poll. Everybody seems to have a little bit of something different, which is a risk to them, and something which our speakers have spoken about so far, and some areas which we may discuss with you later on, with a few of the ideas and scenarios which we've overcome for our clients. So some really interesting thought. Thank you everybody for taking part. What I'm going to do now is I'm going to hand over to James Krask. And just before I hand over to James, the majority of our poll was disruption at supplier. Quite interesting, and I'm sure James will pick up on this. So I'm going to hand over to James. It's James Krask, and James is Head of Resilience for Advisory at our sister company, Marsh.
Thank you, John. Thanks for the introduction. Yeah, so it's great to be here this morning. My team and I help clients plan for events like COVID and manage the disruptive impacts on businesses. And what I want to do for the few minutes that I have with you is just to focus in on what I think organisations should be doing to better prepare themselves and ultimately become more resilient for the next big threat after we've got through the current pandemic. If we just move on to the next slide, now the context within which we are all working, we've heard about it already from the other speakers, it's really complex. Our organisations are part of highly fragile and interconnected ecosystems. We are so dependent upon suppliers, partners, supply chains that go across the world. And for me, there are a number of really important drivers that are pushing us to become more resilient. So number one, the increasing complexity of crisis events. As was just mentioned, who'd have thought we'd have Brexit, and then immediately after Brexit, a pandemic that impacted across the globe and disrupting all of our supply chains, and is continuing to disrupt our businesses. The way that we operate as organisations nowadays means that we're exposed to risks in parts of the world that previously we had no experience of working in, through our supply chains and through our sort of links with customers and so on. So events can happen much more quickly, and they can materialize much more quickly and have an impact upon our businesses than perhaps more so than they would have done in the past. We're also seeing increase in expectations. Regulators are taking a closer interest in resilience. You see it a lot in the banking sector as one example, and that kind of pressure comes down through the supply chain as well. So most of you, I'm sure, will have customers that have asked you questions about your own resilience. I can see that getting more and more important as we move through the next couple of months. We're going to see organisations asking tougher questions. And in fact, we're already seeing insurance companies asking much more probing questions of the quality of resilience arrangements that the companies that they insure have in place. And we're seeing rising expectations from consumers as well. They expect errors, if they do happen, to be corrected quickly, for their services and the products to be recovered quickly. And those organisations that are less well suited to be able to respond quickly are the ones that really suffer. Now, also technology has a big part to play as well. Now, as businesses, we have become so much more dependent upon technology, particularly in the last 15 years. And a lot of our processes are much more automated than they were in the past. Now, clearly that drives enormous efficiencies within our businesses. It means that we can process more quickly and with less resource supporting it ultimately. But it comes at a potential resilience cost, in that when some of that equipment breaks, as it does, the ability to recover is less than perhaps was. And that's because a lot of the knowledge that we used to have within our businesses in how to do things manually is no longer there. They've retired or moved on to other roles. And the level of automation that most of our organizations now run means that actually reverting to a manual way of working when that equipment is disrupted for a short period of time is just not feasible. The amount of product effectively that's being pushed through that automation process means that it's very difficult to actually replace it with a manual process. And then finally, this is really important, I think, in the context we're all operating in a Brexit and pandemic environment where all businesses are constantly pressured to make sure that they're keeping costs controlled. That, of course, has big benefits from an efficiency point of view, but there does become a point where there is a trade-off between the amount of money, effectively, you want to cut out of the business and the amount of resilience that you want to have to weather the future storms that might be just over the horizon. There is a potential conflict there. And if we don't get that balance right, ultimately we could end up with our organizations suffering from disruption. Some of you may have seen or have heard of a town called Onohama, which is in Japan. This is a really interesting case study. Actually, it links really nicely to the 80% or so of the people that said on the poll that a disruption in their supply chain from their supplier is the #1 issue. So in Onohama, there is a production facility that makes a particular type of pigment for the automotive industry. And Onohama is not far away from Fukushima. So it was heavily impacted by the earthquake and tsunami and ultimately the meltdown at Fukushima. And it wasn't until that factory was out of production that the likes of some very big automotive industry players realized that they had a single point of failure in their supply chain. And there were a couple of big automotive companies that you'll all be completely familiar with that had to delay production of certain types of car as a result of not having black and red pigments, which is what this particular production facility produced. So it's clear from that experience and our experience with Brexit and what the other speakers have said as a result of their experience of going through the pandemic, that we need to be better at understanding how our organizations interact with other organizations through our supply chain, and we need better intelligence in order to anticipate risks from arising. If we just go on to the next slide just for a moment, we did some research recently of over 1,000 global organizations and asked them all sorts of questions around their preparedness for big resilience events on the back of the pandemic. And it was surprising to me that only 24% of respondents to that survey said that they actively anticipated emerging risk as part of a formal process, which is a worry. And it sort of worries me that maybe we're potentially sleepwalking into the next big disruption. And I imagine most of you wouldn't have necessarily put a pandemic right at the top of your risk register 2 or 3 years ago. If we move on to the next slide, we also know, again, from our own research, this time it was with Cranfield University back in 2018 when this study was done, that how you respond to a crisis or a business disruption really matters. So what you're looking at here is the share performance of over 70 big corporate businesses that suffered disruption in the previous 10 years prior to the research being conducted. And there's some well-known names in this research. And what it shows is that there are 2 broad types of organization. You have the organizations that respond well to the crisis and are therefore rewarded with a higher share performance relative to their peer group. That's the blue line at the top, 5%. And then there are those organizations that don't handle their crisis as well and lose on average about 12% of their share performance relative to peers. And we're not looking at share price here, we're looking at share performance, which is pegged against their peer group. So it's normalized effectively. And what we looked at was the characteristics of how these organizations responded. And the organizations in the top group were typically better at communicating, they had stronger leadership, they were transparent, they were rapid in their response, versus the group at the bottom. Some of those organisations actively lied to cover up a situation. They were slow to respond, didn't understand the level of public negative sentiment that was leveled towards the organisation. And what we're seeing here is the impact of a good crisis response on an organisation's trust, because that's what shared performance effectively is measuring. So think of this in the context of your supply chain as well, and with your customers. You let people down. I mean, it happens. Disruptions happen, but how you respond to those disruptions is crucial, because that could be the difference between being able to keep that customer or lose that customer. And being in that top group, in that blue group, doesn't happen by accident. It takes effort, it takes planning, it takes training, it takes practice. So we move on to the next slide. Now, I think this context that I've been talking about makes for a bit of a perfect storm, in that we've got a whole bunch of external pressures that are emanating from the wider environment that we work within. We've heard about growing political and economic uncertainty as a result of some of the Brexit issues and the pandemic. We're seeing much more increase in the pace of regulatory change. Brexit's been talked about. If I just want to pause on the third one here, which is all about supply chains, and how COVID, I think, will have quite a drastic impact on the way some of our supply chains will work. If you go back to the Japanese pigment factory, that was a wake-up call to the automotive industry, that they needed to do something slightly different in terms of understanding their supply chain exposures. I think COVID will be a wake-up call for just about everybody else. Yeah, the early days of the COVID crisis, as we've heard from some of the speakers today, were quite chaotic, and for many organisations, it highlighted how little we knew about our supply chains, and how the extent to which that just-in-time approach to providing products and services and shipping them around the world was vulnerable to major disruptions. And I think that's going to drastically change. And as a result of that, I think we're going to see more congestion at ports and terminals, partly because of regulatory change, partly because of growing political and economic uncertainty, and partly because people will be ordering more stuff in smaller batches, potentially, in order to address that just-in-time risk. And finally, I just want to touch on environmental, socioeconomic and governance issues, climate change related issues. Again, I can see this being a major focus in supply chain conversations in the future. So even if you're not currently covered by any legislation or any requirements around climate change reporting, in time, I expect that large organizations who might be your customers will be pushing some of these requirements down into the supply chain. So it might be worth thinking now about how to be ready for that potential request for information. So if we move on to my last slide. Now, as I mentioned earlier, a good response to a crisis doesn't happen by accident. It takes planning and practice. But I think there are three things that we could all keep in mind now that will help us put in place resilience, even if you've not started this process yet. So firstly, it's getting the basics right. Making sure that you have some form of very basic business continuity plan, or a team of individuals that can come together and make rapid decisions. No doubt you've been doing this already throughout the pandemic, so maybe it's the chance now to sort of formalize some of that documentation. I think we need to use more data and analytics to drive our decision making. So looking into the supply chain to look for vulnerabilities and weak spots, and help use that data to help forecast potential emerging risks, so we're not wrong-footed by another pandemic or another crisis coming up over the horizon. And then finally, this links back to the ESG point I made on the previous slide, being ready to tell a positive story. You know, as organizations sitting within somebody else's supply chain, you're going to get lots of questions over your resilience. So being ready to actually talk positively about your resilience and give confidence to your stakeholders is really key. And actually, for me, I think that will provide a competitive edge for many organizations who need to get ahead of their peers in their sector. So let me leave it there. I'll hand back to John and Mel, who take the conversation forward.
Thank you, James. Very interesting. For me, it was quite surprising there is that when you did the poll, you have just 24% of respondents that anticipate emerging risk, and that was taken in 2021. So that was a real shock for me to see that just 24% are doing that. But thank you very much, James. Just as a quick reminder, do please note any questions into the Q&A box at the bottom. We've already got a couple of great questions in there that I will go to at the end, and we will get to as many as we possibly can. So now it's over to myself and John. We've got a few real life client stories that we'd like to share with you. So I have some questions for you, John, relating to the stories you're going to be speaking about today. So firstly, financial and business implications of not being able to provide goods and services are obviously the potentially huge for any organisation. So why is it important to have a robust supply chain?
I mean, I think that's been touched on throughout the webinar, Mal. A robust supply chain, it keeps the processes flowing, doesn't it, for all of our clients and for all of their risks. I mean, if you look at one of our examples, which we've got, which is one of our clients of a specialist, and they develop allergy treatments. And what they wanted to do with us, Mal, is they wanted to ensure the robustness of their supply chain and then just identify any process gaps. So what we did is our consultants performed a detailed review of their existing supply chain strategies, and that spanned materials movements, their critical suppliers, and their customers too. And what we did is we hosted a full day workshop for the clients, and we walked through and dissected all aspects of their supply chain risk. We provided them with an assessment of the current state of their supply chain processes and a view on potential business interruption impacts as a result of any supply chain incidents or failures, and also provide an agreed improvement roadmap for them, and that include improved due diligence and monitoring. So a really good result for them, and just highlighting some of the strength that we've got within our group.
Okay. So no matter how careful businesses assess their risks, obviously, as we all very well know, unforeseen events do still occur. So what would you recommend?
Sorry, Mal, you broke up a little bit there, my friend. But let me just highlight what I think we should get for resilience. And I've come on to one of our existing clients, and they're a consumer products company, and they've got global manufacturing operations, and they wanted to better understand about what business continuity risk that they had and how it could disrupt their operations, and then how they could prepare. So we worked with that manufacturer to develop a business continuity plan for their critical operations. And it was over the last 12 months, it included a way to address people-related pandemic risk issues and also facilitate a return to work. The client actually got a deeper understanding of their various risks and their costs, a greater appreciation of the value of risk management, and we position them to be in a better place to respond to unexpected events. So that was from disruptions to their single source suppliers, so as James just spoke about, and also with cyber attack as well, and with a few others in there too. So that business got a really good understanding of what their risk is and how to manage it.
Great, okay. So a lot of our clients purchase goods from Asia, and we've just heard about what James told us in Japan, but obviously they're subject in Asia to natural catastrophe events. So do you have any examples where a catastrophe occurred and how it would have impacted our clients?
Surprisingly, we do. So we've got a client who source hard disk drives from Thailand and the Far East, and then they bring them back into Europe and assemble them for distribution worldwide. There was a time when there was some monsoon rains in Thailand, and it was devastating for the country. And there was a shutdown of hundreds of factories. Now, Thailand, which some people may or may not know, actually produces about a quarter of the world's hard drive output. And our clients saw their business severely impacted by the interruptions in their supply chain. We worked with them to understand how they've been impacted by the incident, but also how to calculate and to measure the claim. So the client concentrated on restoring its supply chain with alternative suppliers from third-party vendors in the spot market. And that meant that they incurred increased costs of working in order to mitigate their loss. Now, that client were really lucky. They were able to claim for the costs of mitigating the loss by sourcing the components from alternative suppliers. And then we also assisted them with the financial calculations, which enabled them to make further claims for increased cost of working on the business interruption insurance.
Great, okay, thank you. So finally, John, as we both know, food and beverage are the largest manufacturers in the UK. So what would you say are the issues with the supply chain there, particularly with things like contaminated products?
Huge issues, and those food and drink manufacturers know all about the supply chain and just in time and what can go wrong with contamination. This is an example from our colleagues at Marsh, and again shows our expertise and how we can help further with our clients. The client's an international food supplier of prepackaged food, and they were an exclusive supplier to a major global event, and they suffered a substantive contamination of their food stocks. Now, the insurers actually turned down the claim on the basis that the loss fell within an exclusion clause in the policy on contamination. What that client and Marsh did is we worked together with our forensic accounting and claims experts to gain a better understanding of the causes. We analysed the financial documents to firstly quantify the loss, as well as combing through the policy wordings to see if there were any clauses or extensions that we could use in favour of the client so that we could try and overturn that claim. Now, what we actually managed to do was we negotiated a multi-million-dollar settlement, which was achieved within 4 months of that incident date, and it provided the client with sufficient funding to meet its supply obligations. So a really happy client, and just goes to show that when we use all of our expertise in one place, we can get the right result for the client by overturning claims.
Great, that's great. Thanks, John. So a few issues there and some solutions and some great results for the outcome. That's brilliant. Thank you. Okay, so we have got a few minutes left and we're going to now go to the questions and answers. So we've got a couple of great questions here. The first one is from Malcolm Robertson, and this looks to be for Filtermist. If you'd like to answer this, Martin, Kavanagh, Maria. The question is, did you develop approved exporter status?
Hi, everyone. I think I'll answer this one with it being on the export side of things. Yes, we did. We did this via the customs agency. And it just meant that we're able to provide proof of preferential origin directly onto the invoices. For our customers, this means that then when the goods get to the other side, they don't have to pay duty if they're duty free. It means that they don't have to pay unnecessarily and then take the time to claim later on. So yeah, in short, yes, we did via the customs agency.
Okay, fantastic. Thanks very much, Maria. Thank you. Okay, our next question is for you, Chris. So, and you've been told you've done a great talk there, Chris, very interesting. So you list innovation as one of the 5 priorities. So what do you think are the biggest opportunities for innovation in the logistics industry?
I think the innovation for me covers 2 key subjects, really. Innovation in terms of recruitment and how we become an employer of choice and fish effectively in a dwindling labour pool. And then I think the IT is a constant race in terms of innovation. So for me, innovation is people and technology.
Brilliant, thank you. Okay, we have a couple more. This one is for, back to Filtermist. This is for Martin. So from a supply chain perspective, what will be your main challenges for the second half of 2021, Martin?
Yeah, I think it's going to be really what is going to happen with COVID and how long we are getting these supply chain issues and these costs. How long is that going to last over the next over H2, as well as managing the current state. But if we had a crystal ball, it would be great to know when this COVID thing is going to end.
Definitely. Okay. Thank you very much. We've just got 2 more questions. So this one is to James. So James, after COVID, what do you think the next big resilience challenge will be that organisations need to be planning for?
Well, I think you've heard it all in the press, but climate change is has been an ever-present issue for a long time now, but now regulators are getting more interested. Customers are starting to ask questions. Shareholders are starting to ask questions. I think that's going to be the next big focus. And we've been doing a lot of work with clients up and down the country and overseas on this very question.
Okay, thank you. Yeah, thank you, James. And the final question is for you, John. What is the most important insurance cover to have for supply chain concerns?
I think the most important cover would be your business interruption, and for you to make sure that your business interruption is extended to include your supply chain. But most importantly, it's to understand your risk, understand what you're purchasing, understand what it covers. And when you need to make a claim, understand how you can quickly make a claim. But business interruption would be my top #1 piece of insurance to purchase to mitigate supply chain risks.
Yeah, okay, thank you, John. Okay, well, I'd like to thank everybody for attending today, and a huge thank you to our panelists, Martin, Karen, Maria, Chris, James, and John. Hope I've mentioned everyone there. And we hope you've enjoyed today's webinar and hope that you've all taken away some useful information to help grow your business and to ensure that you do get those risks very much so mitigated. And as promised, I'll send the answers around. I will actually send the questions and answers around, as well as a link to this webinar, because we have been recording the webinar. We've also got some very interesting articles on supply chain issues, so we'll send that around also. We shall look forward to speaking to you all again soon for our next webinar that's coming up in September. Many thanks again, and please enjoy the rest of your day. Thank you.